pumpkin pie and the eggnog that I still have not enjoyed. We're going to play some football this week against the Miami Dolphins. But I'm not sure what is going on with the baseball world. We've got the S word is back. Stoppage, strike, what have you. This guy is one of my favorite guests to have on. It's been a little while since I've had him on. Shame that it takes work stoppages and rumors and saber rattling to bring Maury Brown back on the program from Forbes, from Portland, Oregon, and Bizball. Maury out on Twitter. Our defending champion for 2015 is back. Here's Maury Brown. What's going on, man? It's this concerns me. I'm an old fart like you. I remember when they didn't get along and they hated each other. As a fan, it sucked.
Well, I mean, it is something to get a little bit concerned about, Nestor. I mean, it's certainly one of those things to where, we've had 21 years without any stoppage. But,
that's amazing. Before you even say that, let me just say, it always feels like they're at war, doesn't it? I mean, it seems almost incomprehensible that it's been 21 years of labor peace, because it feels like I've spent most of my career talking about them hating each other, but it was only the first 10 years.
Yeah, it was, I can tell you that in 2002, I sat, before we had Twitter, before we had social media, I sat and reloaded my browser like every minute or so as the clock came close to midnight, because I thought, there was a good chance that once again we were going to have some kind of work stoppage.
I remembered it all, man. I mean, it almost cost me my career in '94. I mean, I'm celebrating my 25th year 2 weeks from now on radio. So my career began in '91. Dude, the '94 strike was in Baltimore, where we had no Ravens at all, right? I mean, the Ravens weren't even a glimmer in our eye. We had lost expansion here, which is something I know you know well about in Portland on the baseball side. Baseball was everything here in '94, and Cal Ripken saving baseball and all of that. I mean, it feels like it was a minute ago, but it was, over 2 decades ago. I mean, it's been that long that the younger people aren't even familiar with all of this crap that we dealt with in the 80s and 90s, right?
It's true. I mean, and the player, so speaking about this in the now, you don't have a single player, and you don't have, irrespective of some of the older owners, you have a lot of owners that have never gone through this. But look, Nestor, I still will be surprised. I'll be surprised come Thursday whether it happens. And if it does happen, I think it'll be exceptionally short-lived. And there's a number of reasons for this. Number one, while Rob Manfred has been at the helm and really been involved with the last 3 labor deals, he was not commissioner, right? I mean, he was basically at the behest of Bud Selig.
But he was the guy that made sure that a strike never hit Bud Selig's desk, right? I mean, he was, in the end, the voice of reason. He was the guy that got deals done where old Buddy couldn't figure out a way to get around Don Fear, right?
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, he was really just been that guy. And then you've got Tony Clark, who's a former player, right? And he's, he has no background in labor. So there's something significant here for both of them. Neither one of them want to be the guys that even in the offseason, let's think about this, right? So let's just say, let's roll the clock forward, and you and I are having this conversation on Thursday. And they're like, yeah, it's looking like it's going to happen. What happens on Friday? Nothing. Something. It would freeze free agency. But, to the fans, it's really about if any games are lost. It'll be a big deal for people like me, people like you in the media. If the sports media landscape is going to explode about it. But in the overall, in the reality of it, fans aren't going to be impacted until we start getting close to February, when pitchers and catchers report. So I still think, though, I really think that something's going to happen here. It's really stuck around one core issue and what's going to be given up in terms of making that happen, and that's really an international draft, which is something that the league has wanted dating back to that 2002, that 2003 labor deal. They wanted it to happen then, and it withered on the vine. And every labor deal since, the owners have said, hey, let's make this happen. The players say no. They say, well, how about if we do some committees and see if we can do it in between labor deals? And it withers on the vine.
Why are the players against this? Just, educate me here, Maury.
Well, I think the biggest reason is that, why they're against it is they see a large portion of the players that would be impacted by this. I mean, if you look at it, it's about 20, 25, 26% of Major League Baseball is a lot of players that are international. So
Sure.
the free agents, some of them making big money.
And that number might be
would
getting bigger, not smaller, in Venezuela and Dominican and Asia, right? I mean, it may go from 26 to 34 in the next 10 years, right?
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, the biggest thing, though, is really this. So they go, fine, you want to make that happen. I mean, and remember, it doesn't impact the Players Association until players are on the 40-man roster and they start paying their dues. Still, if you go, fine, what are you going to give us for this big concession? And the owners have said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take away, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take away any situation where a club is going to have to give up a conditional pick. And we'll make it so where you have unrestricted free agency. It'll be the most, this is quotes from either an executive in Rosenthal's piece or others that said it's going to be the most unrestrictive model in all the professional sports. And I think that the players have finally said, you know what, though, that's just, the number of players that run through this, it's just not enough. It's just not enough for us to want to go ahead and do this with an international draft where, of course, some of the veterans would prefer it, right? I mean, if you're Scott Boras and you represent Bryce Harper, and Bryce Harper's going, look, man, I haven't even hit free agency yet, and yet some guy that has never been tested that's from Cuba or from Latin America can come here and can get a massive deal. And we've seen deals, $30, $25, $30 million deals for players that have never played one game in the majors or any professional North American system, getting massive deals that some of these players have to work through. So, I mean, it's an interesting point in the sense that the owners are already making a ton of money, and yet at the same time they're going, hey, we really need to tamp this down because our system that we've had where we go ahead and say this is how much you're supposed to spend on international free agents, and if you go over that, you're going to get taxed. The clubs don't care. They're blowing right through it. So the Players Association, I'm sure, while I haven't talked to anybody, if you were to pull one of them aside, they would say something along the lines of this. Nobody's holding a gun to your head to spend this money. None of you guys are. So why do you need to give some system and put us in place and put this thing in place because you guys don't have any self-control? So, I mean,
well, they've said
really
that for 40 years. I mean, literally. I mean, that was the beginning of the premise of Marvin Miller, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's really the feeling of all of that. There really is all of that around free agency or any of that stuff. But it does boil down to it's very difficult for these owners where they've got so much money now flowing in to not want to have or be in a position to where if you're a team right on the cusp, if you can go out and get one player that's a difference maker that can put you over the top, well, then, the money is there. And, of course, these are the kind of things that, that has gotten the league in trouble before. I mean, we've seen, collusion, not once, not twice, but 3 times, where it was really a matter of where we had Peter Ubroth, who was the commissioner at the time, pulling them all in the room and saying, you guys are all so stupid. If I give you a button that says you guys could win 85 games without spending, or one over here where you could win 90, possibly, you'll always go for that one. And then he said, you know what to do, which is what got them into the collusion problems. I don't believe there's any collusion going on right now. I think that the game is actually pretty solid. It's really boiling down, Nestor, to concessions right now. And this is how these things work, right? I'm going to give you something. You want something. What are you going to give us that's going to do this? Because the players, I can make a pretty solid case that the players have really kind of not been on the better end of things. The owners have made more money. Granted, the players are making a ton of money. I mean, this is part of the labor peace thing. Everybody's making money. You guys, you idiots, go out there and go into some protracted work stoppage, then it changes everything, and you start to kill the golden goose.
But, well, I mean, we've heard that many, many times where the golden goose has been shot in the head. I mean, this country elected Donald Trump president 2 weeks ago, so, anything's possible at this point. Anything's on the table. But I would say this. I had somebody say to me a few weeks ago, they're making too much money to be at war with each other, and I'm like, maybe the cast of characters is different now, and with guys like Angelos and Lerner still there, but guys like Steinbrenner and Ted Turner and some of those guys that have been long since gone that were key figures in all of this, that's just when the fight gets even uglier, is when there's even more money to fight over. No one's ever happy, and it's always been billionaires versus millionaires, and it's always been, quite frankly, pretty boring to baseball's audience, right? But this is a week where it'll either get better and get fixed, or there'll be acrimony, and there's plenty of money to be acrimonious about, I think, because there's plenty of money to be sniffed out here, because you're right. I think the owners have gotten richer off of this. I think the players may accept that maybe more than they did 30 years ago, or more than they did when it was more sort of hawkish, and Donald Fear was involved, and Marvin Miller, and a lot of that was principled, right? A lot of that was, you're trying to screw me. I don't know that the baseball players in the last 15 or 20 years have absolutely felt like they're getting screwed here. They've all made a lot of money.
Well, and I don't think that they do either. And I would really get back to this. I mean, there is no way that this situation right now feels or acts at all like it did in 1994 or during the 80s, or any of the labor,
or even '02, which you covered, which was
yeah.
That was an 11th hour thing. And by the way, Angelos got huge credit for coming in and being sort of the fixer upper guy, the Winston Wolfe in the 11th hour. That thing with Bud Selig, which is one of the reasons he thought that Bud would never bring the team to DC, right? I mean, because he thought he did Bud a solid. Bud would never put a team in DC, and it only made him wealthier. But I wrote a book on it, Maury. I had to point that out. It did start with labor.
No, that's
discourse.
It is a huge thing, I think that it's changed a lot. Look, I think that the best way that to really kind of describe this is, I remember talking to Rob Manfred prior to him being commissioner, and I talked to the former executive director of the MLBPA, God rest his soul, and Michael Weiner, who passed away from cancer, right? And the conversation was really interesting. I was talking about how revenue sharing should be used. And Manfred was like, look, if a team is there and they've got it and they're really downcycling and they're rebuilding, if they pay off some of their debt, I don't see anything wrong with that. Well, I got Mike Weiner on the line, and he was like, I don't know where he's coming from with that, but that is absolutely not how it's supposed to do. But the thing that killed me about all of it was, if you talked about a salary floor or you talked about a salary cap, they didn't even express it in those terms anymore. It was such a dirty word to talk about the things that they argued about prior.
By the way, when every other league has some semblance of at least a floor that benefits the players, that says the Houston Astros and the Tampa Rays can't go out and field some half-assed $38 million team,
Yeah, but so what they called it, though, Nestor, which is amazing, was salary compression. And this is they would not even use
sounds
the
like
term
an MP3
salary
file.
cap. and so this tells you, and this is, of course, in the middle of when things are going well. This isn't that terribly long ago. So, look, I don't think that these guys go out and say, hey, let's go out and have family picnics together. But the one thing that they do have, and this is the thing that I think is most important with baseball and why it's done so well, is that they're partners with the players. I believe that the league is in partner with the players, which you don't have with the NFL. The NFL is very, very disconnected from that, and that's a real problem. And if you look at the NFL, it's very much like Major League Baseball during the time when, say, Bowie Kuhn was the commissioner, and really during the 80s and Marvin Miller was in play. So I get to this, Nestor, I'm not going to believe that there's going to be a lockout until we are sitting at around this time on Thursday. Whenever that thing is set to expire, I think that what really happens with this stuff is that even in the most difficult times when they can't agree on how they're going to make something happen, when it comes down to the 11th hour and you're in the last window, things get done.
Deadlines create that, right? Literally.
Yeah, and so, I spoke to an executive, off record, of course, because if he went on record, he would have been fine. But he said some things, that we're kind of talking about here. One, he said, I'd be really surprised if we saw a lockout. And that was, I thought, really something telling. He said, then he immediately flipped and he said, but at the same time, both sides are going to, fight for what they think is important to them. But he stuck on the thing that we're talking about here as well, is that he goes, everybody has gotten there's been so much prosperity. There's been so much prosperity by avoiding this thing that I think that really the pressures will be there to do that. And if you see some of the stories that are kind of dribbling out around all of this, there really is, you see this, there's a path to getting the deal done, that these things are together, that they're meeting today, and that they'll probably meet it well into the night. And, you have a few days here to get things done. So, look, do they pull the international draft off the table? Maybe, because you know what? We've gone this long without it. I think that the league, though, is making it pretty doggone clear that they're willing to really push this thing much harder than they have before. And if that is the case, then it's really incumbent upon them as well to try and find something that they can give the players. Now, look, I don't know what that is. The players might go in there and go, you know what, this MLB Advanced Media thing that you guys have made a ton of money on is about the games. In every other league, that's considered, that would be considered baseball-related revenue. So we want a chunk of that. If you want to have this international draft, give us that. Well, I've got a sneaking suspicion that the owners aren't going to want to dig that one or give that one up. So it's going to have to be something. If you're going to ask for something as significant as an international draft, you're going to have to give something significant back to the players, and I think that that's what they're trying to work through.
He is Maury Brown. He's Bizball Maury out on Twitter as well as at Forbes, where he writes about the business of sports, and his love of baseball is like ours, but also a rock and roll guy in an AC/DC cover band, which may be the best way to see AC/DC based on what I saw with some of the Axl Rose stuff there at the end. But we'll get to that in a minute. Maury, you brought up a great point, and look, man, I'm celebrating 25 years on radio in a couple of weeks, and when I came into this thing, we were just getting Camden Yards. The 81 strike was very clear in my mind. All the spring training nonsense that went on in the 80s and replacement players in 94 and Cal Ripken streak. All of that stuff feels very real to me. And reading, John Hellier's book, Lords of the Realm, and the history and Marvin Miller. I'm into all that. I'm a historian about all that. But this, to your way of thinking, also over this century, let's say, there isn't the bad blood. These players haven't experienced a strike or a lockout. They don't even remember maybe even being a kid and living through the 94 strike, that it's old farts like us that have that bad juju about it all, you know what I mean? That bad feeling about it. But the modern thing in the last 10 or 15 years, it's been a lot of guys making a lot of money, and everybody's sort of making a lot of money, and if you can play a little bit, you're going to get paid a whole lot of bit. And there is no Marvin Miller, there is no Don Fear, and I don't know that anybody sits around telling old stories about how old Peter's going to screw you, you know what I mean? Like, I don't sense that from the modern players, although, to your point, the Borises and the agents were around for a lot of that stuff, but it doesn't feel as ominous as it kind of always did, right? I mean, for 15 or 20 years, you and I were baseball fans during our formative years where it always was a part of the players hated the owners and the owners hated the players, and you knew it. You knew it all the time.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing was, it took so considerably long for the players to get to some sense of being what, as Marvin Miller said, kind of indentured servitude to the owners.
Yeah.
You had no rights. You really had no recourse. And Miller, of course, had come from a labor background with the steel industry. And, of course, he was, appalled. He's like, what do you mean you're not going to give us salary arbitration? I mean, it's a management labor thing. There are laws around this stuff. So it took a very long time. And then, of course, the owners had consistently tried to claw back forever and a day, right? They were always insistent upon trying to get back to something more to where the things were. And the salary cap was really that thing. And now, and it just became such an impossible thing to have happen, even though there was a deal that was remotely looked at and it seemed like it might have come to fruition. It fell apart, and that's where you got into the 94.
By the way, to my way of thinking, it's a shame. I mean, as a fan, baseball would be better if they had a salary cap. It just would be.
Well, I can argue against that, Nestor. I'm one of those people that are against it because you wind up getting into really crazy scenarios like we see in the NBA, where there's this massive spike in revenues that come in through television. It has to go to the players because there's a cap that says this amount of money has to go, a percentage of it has to go to the players, and you wind up having players being paid potentially more than their value. Now, look, I mean, whatever the value is really incumbent upon the market, right? The market moves, the market shifts. What a player got paid 5 years ago is different than what they get paid now. But it does get to these things where you have some really artificial things in play, and it's the thing that really drives the biggest wedges. And the NBA looks like they're going to be able to dodge something here, which is pretty doggone remarkable. But the NFL is really hitched up around a bunch of stuff around how much money goes in there. They're always trying to audit where money's going. The owners are always trying to figure out ways to keep part of it. The players are trying to ensure they get their part of it. And I really think that with the NFL, the exception, the cap systems really are, they're all flexible. You could say there's one in baseball, right? I mean, you could say that the luxury tax, albeit that luxury tax threshold is about to go up significantly. It's like it's going to hit about $200 million. But I get back to this. Almost every team, with I think 5 of them the exception, have pretty much all been in the playoffs in the last 5 years or last 10 years. So if you look at it, you go, well, the Royals made it. The problem, of course, Nestor, with baseball system is you can be good and be in a small market and be competitive now the way the teams draft, and they do have some money to go out and do stuff in free agency. It's how long they can be competitive. And so that's the reason why if you look at the Cubs are absolutely built to last more than one championship. Now, they've got to play that season next year. It's not a given, but they're young and they're awfully talented, and I think that they can do an awful lot with that. If you're Kansas City was competitive for, 2.5 seasons, right? So it does boil down to how often those teams are competitive. You're going to be in a better position if you're in Los Angeles or if you're in New York or Boston, and I would say in Baltimore, than you would be in other places in, say, Pittsburgh or Tampa Bay, where it is harder to have happen. And so revenue sharing is something that's going on between the owners right now, and that's another part of it that's little talked about that I think we'll see some changes are. I think Oakland's going to be on the outside looking in on that thing. They gave them a break to try and get a new stadium built. They sat on their hands and did nothing, and now you see John Fisher of the Levi Strauss Empire, taking over, and I think that you're going to start to see some movement there.
Yeah, well, they say the same thing on the football side there as well. Maury Brown joining us here. He is Bizball Maury out on Twitter as well as at Forbes. Sort of last thing sports-related for you, the National Harbor is supposed to be hosting the baseball winter meetings. What's the jeopardy there? Because shutting down baseball this weekend would shut down all activity for signing players, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would still go on. There would be a whole bunch of writers sitting around going, boy, this is really boring. Look, for a guy like me that covers the business side of things, it would be business as usual. There would be a lot of stuff. I wouldn't write about player signings, but there's a whole bunch of activity that goes on. But for those writers that are there, the beat writers that are there covering a particular team, looking to see what the general managers are doing, and what the agents and the players are doing, they would be frozen out. And I mean, it would be weird. You would have MLB Network and everybody sitting there, and you'd have basically, managers doing their press conferences, but they wouldn't be able to talk about any new players. There would be no signings. And everybody, of course, would be honing in on this. And this is one more reason, Nestor, why I think they avoid this, because that's sitting right on the other side of this deadline Thursday.
Well,
Yeah, it starts right up.
Yeah, it's all orchestrated so that they get a deal, not so that they don't get a deal, right?
No, it's to get a deal because, look, it'll be bad enough Thursday if they don't reach a deal, right? I mean, there'll be people like me and a bunch of others writing about this. But when the winter meetings start and there's 10,000 people walking around and 300 or 400 people in the media picking their nose because they don't have anything to write about, they're going to write about this lockout. And so there's an awful lot of pressure to keep this stuff out of the media, to keep the churn of it going, to try and basically, you'll get a lot of people talking about stuff and how, they're trying to make something out of nothing, I think. And really, I think that what it does, though, is there will be an awful lot of this. Hey, they went 21 years. The two new guys screwed it up. And I think that that's a legitimate thing, and I think that's something that's hanging over the edge of Rod Manfred and Tony Clark's shoulders. Look, they both have something to prove. Rob has something to prove because he's now in charge, and he basically is at the behest of the owners. This is something that people don't often look at. They look at the commissioner, but they're really hired by the owners. The owners want to make this thing happen because they've tried multiple times. Well, at a certain point, Rob has to sit there and go, how far do we want to take this thing? And is it really in our best interest? And Rob has told me on a number of occasions that he sees baseball as a growth industry. So how can you really lock the players out over this stuff? This is the questions he will have to answer. How can you lock the players out when you're telling us that you're about ready to go into $10 billion, that you're growing like crazy to the point where you're talking about expansion, and here we are locking the players out over something like this? Can't you guys get it figured out? So I think that there'll just be an awful lot of pressure. Nothing in this world is certain, but I think that there's an awful good chance that they get this thing done by Thursday. If it goes past Thursday, I can't see this thing. Certainly, it's not going to drag into spring training. There's just no way in this world I can see it happening.
He is Maury Brown, Bizball. Maury out on Twitter as well as out at Forbes. Any rock and roll updates, man? I haven't seen the Rush documentary yet. I've been in a sports thing, like a sports bubble, the last couple of months. I'm going to see Springsteen over in Australia and New Zealand, but I got no rock and roll to give you, Maury. I haven't seen anything exciting lately. Sucks.
Well, I went and saw the Time Stand Still thing in the theater, and it was depressing.
It was depressing. Everybody says they wanted to cry.
It was depressing because it was really this look into them, to Rush stopping to tour, and I looked at the buddy that I was sitting next to, and I go, God, that was just depressing.
Downer,
but
right?
I can always hope that they continue to do studio work. It's great. I went on a road trip with my kid to go visit my mom, and I had Spotify dug up, and I played him, a bunch of Rush stuff,
nice.
And he's totally into it. But I played him All the World's a Stage, and and at that time in like 1976, I think, it was just fantastic stuff. So that is it. And then I'm gearing up for a bunch of stuff going on with the AC/DC tribute. I got festivals lined up already. If I'm looking outside, it's pouring down rain, and I got a bunch of summer festivals lined up. So life's pretty good right now.
Well, Shoot the Thrill, right? Correct.
That's correct, man. And it's Shoot the Thrill. So, we're playing a big, the seventh one, this big outdoor thing called Hairfest with 18 tribute bands, and it's a trip. There's like 5,000 people each day, and a huge, it's on par with any quality regular concert you would go see. I mean,
where is it and when is it?
Big time stuff. What now?
When is it and where is it?
So it is in Canby, Oregon. On July 16th and 17th. You can look up Hairfest. It's HAREFEST, like the hair, like the rabbit.
Rabbit, right.
Hairfest.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah, man, that'll be the only one you find, but it's a big deal. Tickets go on sale Monday. It'll be a big deal. We'll sell it out like we do every year.
Hey, feed your head, man. That's all I could say, He is Maury Brown out in Portland, Oregon. Bizball Maury at Forbes, as well as out on Twitter. Love having you on, man. Let's, hopefully, if you're in for sure, I owe you at least 2 beers if you're in town for the winter meetings. I'm going to go down for a couple days myself and sniff around a little bit.
Well, if I make it, Nestor, we'll absolutely have to do that.
All right, man. It's on me. I promise you. Maury, great having you on. Be well.
All right, man. You take care of yourself. Thanks.
He is Maury Brown, Bizball Maury, out on Twitter. You can find me in the Bio Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. WNST.net, AM 1570, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.